Hi, I'm Alex, 26, and a month ago my parents showed up at my house demanding that I fix the sister they abandoned me for. I told them to kick rocks, and the fallout that followed felt like decades of buried chaos finally detonating in real time. But let me back up, because this disaster didn't start last month. This thing has roots going all the way back to when I was 8 years old and my entire world got boxed up into a duffel bag and handed off to my Uncle Frank like I was a piece of misplaced luggage. I was 8. My sister, Victoria, was 6. And she had acute lymphoblastic leukemia, the kind of diagnosis that turns parents into full-time soldiers in a medical war they never trained for. I don't blame them for falling apart at first. Any parent would. It was everything they did next that turned my childhood into the prequel for a lifetime of emotional whiplash. 3 months into treatment, they sat me down for what they called a family meeting. If you've never had your entire life bulldozed by 2 adults with breaking voices and wet tissue paper in their hands, believe me, you're not missing out. Dad did the talking. Mom did the crying. And I did the sitting there trying not to breathe too loud, like that might make things less terrifying. They told me they needed to focus entirely on Victoria. They told me I would be better off with Uncle Frank. For a little while. Just until things got better. Just until things calmed down. Just until. My 8-year-old brain clung to those words like they were some kind of return ticket home. And then they drove me 4 hours away, dropped me on Frank's porch with a duffel bag and a stuffed dinosaur, and left before the spaghetti he made for dinner had even cooled. I remember that first night perfectly. Frank tried to talk. I tried not to cry. My parents didn't come back. And that perfectly describes the next 9 years of my life. Frank wasn't just better than my parents. He was a one-man repair shop for a kid whose entire foundation had just been yanked out from under him. He showed up to everything. School meetings, sports, concerts so bad angels wept. He built me a bookshelf by hand because he noticed I liked space books. He taught me how to use tools without losing fingers, how to cook something that wasn't cereal, and how to grow into a person without growing bitter. Meanwhile, my parents called once a month, always about Victoria. Her white blood cell counts. Her treatments. Her doctors. Her everything. Not once did they ask how school was, or if I was lonely, or if I missed them. Their conversations made me feel like a distant relative they were legally obligated to check in on. The visits were somehow worse, 3 times a year of watching them gush about Victoria's bravery while I quietly inhaled chicken tenders at whatever restaurant they picked. Once I showed Mom my honor roll report card. She said, "That's nice," and immediately launched into a chemotherapy update. Frank, on the other hand, plastered the report card on the fridge and told everyone at the hardware store that his kid was a genius. Somewhere in those early years, the difference between parents and family became painfully obvious. Anyone can be a parent. Family is who shows up. And my parents didn't show up. Not for birthdays. Not for competitions. Not for milestones. Not for me. But they sure showed up 9 years later, demanding I help the sister I barely knew. And that's when everything went nuclear. By the time I turned 16, my life with Uncle Frank felt so normal that the idea of going home to my parents was about as realistic as being recruited into a secret wizard academy. We had a rhythm: school, work, garage time, real conversations, actual support. It was the kind of stable, predictable life that kids with normal parents grow up assuming is standard. I knew better. Meanwhile, my parents treated me like an out-of-state cousin they occasionally remembered existed. They called when Victoria relapsed. They called when she went into remission. They called when they needed Frank to confirm, again, that keeping me indefinitely was still okay. They didn't call for my birthdays, my robotics wins, or my emotional well-being. But they always dialed instantly whenever Victoria's circumstances required my absence or my silence. Victoria beat cancer a second time when I was 16. My parents came to visit. All 4 of them. First time in over a year. Victoria was 14, thin, pale, walking like she wasn't fully convinced gravity was on her side. I barely recognized her. She barely recognized me. We sat across from each other at dinner like two strangers at a networking event only either of us signed up for. My parents, in their infinite social grace, tried to force bonding like they were wiring two incompatible devices with duct tape. Tell your brother about your art class, Victoria. Tell your sister about your robotics team, Alex. It was painful. Like watching someone try to reboot a relationship that never existed. Then, as we stood in a parking lot lit by fluorescent lights and disappointment, they dropped the bomb. We want you to come home, Dad said. Just like that. Like they were offering me a ride, not uprooting an entire life. He said it like 9 years was a slight detour. Like the duffel bag, the missed birthdays, the empty chairs, the emotional neglect, none of it counted because they suddenly decided they were ready for round 2 of parenting. Mom chimed in with the usual wet tissue sentimentality. We've missed you so much. Don't you want to be with your family again? I looked at Uncle Frank. He didn't say anything at first, but the look in his eyes told me everything. He already knew the truth. He'd known for years. I wasn't going home because I already was home. But I couldn't say that out loud, not with my parents staring at me like they were trying to reel me back in with a hook and fishing line made of guilt trips. Can I think about it? I asked. Dad didn't like that. The muscle in his jaw twitched like it was trying to escape. Mom looked wounded, as usual. Frank stepped in, steady as bedrock. Let him finish high school here, he said. He's got 1 year left. Uprooting him would be rough. Dad clearly wanted to bite his head off but couldn't do it in a public parking lot without getting banned from the steakhouse. So they agreed. Fine. 1 year. Then I would come home. Spoiler, I did not. Senior year rolled in like a sunrise after a long storm. Robotics team, college applications, friends, a girlfriend, a future. It was the first time I wasn't waiting for the other shoe to drop, because the shoe had already dropped 9 years ago, and Uncle Frank had quietly handed me a new pair of boots. I applied for engineering programs. Got scholarships. Picked a school 2 hours from Frank's house. And when I told my parents, they lost their collective minds. They expected me to move back home. Live with them. Go to a college they chose. Follow the script they never bothered to include me in. Dad said I was ungrateful. Mom cried like she'd discovered new levels of emotional decibels. They guilted. They begged. They demanded. I said no. And for the first time, I meant it. I left for college with my life, my choices, and my freedom. And for a few sweet years, the quiet between us felt like peace. Of course, quiet never lasts. Especially when parents like mine decide they're suddenly ready to start parenting again. College was supposed to be a clean break, and for the most part, it was. I studied engineering, made real friends, started dating a girl named Hannah who laughed like life wasn't a never-ending emotional obstacle course, and built a future that wasn't held together with duct tape and childhood trauma. Uncle Frank visited once a month without fail, showing up with homemade meals because he claimed dorm food was a felony in several states. He asked actual questions about my classes and listened to the answers like my life mattered. He didn't guilt-trip me. Didn't demand anything. He just showed up. My parents? 3 calls the entire first year. And every one of them was basically, so, when are you transferring to the college near us so we can pretend the last decade didn't happen? But the real turning point didn't come until after I graduated. I was 25, with a stable job at an engineering firm, my own house, a functioning adult existence, and a peace I didn't even realize I'd been missing until I finally had it. And then my phone rang. Unknown number. Should have ignored it. Didn't. It was my mother. She hadn't called in over a year, and now her voice was sugary sweet in that way people get when they're about to ask you for something you absolutely do not want to give. Oh honey, how are you? It's been too long. What do you want? I asked. That knocked the wind out of her fake cheer faster than a brick through a glass window. Then she launched into this speech about how Victoria was struggling. Really struggling. Couldn't find a job. Living at home. Depression. Anxiety. No direction. No stability. No resilience. You could practically hear the spotlight turning toward me. We thought maybe you could help her. Mom said. She looks up to you. I laughed. Actually laughed. Out loud. She doesn't know me. I said. We're strangers. Mom didn't appreciate that. So she did what she always did when logic failed. She weaponized guilt like a seasoned professional. She almost died. We did everything to save her. The least you could do is show some compassion. You did everything for her. I corrected. You did nothing for me. That's when Dad took the phone. And not calmly. He went full volume, lecturing me about duty and obligation and family loyalty, about how they'd made unthinkable sacrifices, about how I owed them, yes, owed them, support for Victoria now. I let him rant until he ran out of breath. Then I said the clearest sentence of my adult life. Your choices have consequences. I'm not holding a grudge. I'm just not interested. Dad tried to yell again, but I hung up. I called Uncle Frank next. They want me to fix her life, I said. He sighed. Figured that call would come eventually. And that should have been the turning point. But oh no. The real turning point was still loading. Because ignoring their calls was one thing. Blocking their numbers was another. But nothing, and I mean nothing, could have prepared me for the day they showed up on my doorstep unannounced, uninvited, and absolutely unhinged. It was a Friday. I was working from home, designing a conveyor system and feeling smug about how efficiently my life was running. Hannah was at work. The house was quiet. Peaceful. Adult. Exactly the opposite of everything that was about to happen. Then came the banging. Not knocking. Not ringing. Banging. The kind of pounding that screams open up before I kick this door in. I opened it and instantly regretted owning a front door. My parents and Victoria were standing on my porch like some kind of apocalyptic family intervention team. Dad looked furious, Mom looked emotionally constipated, and Victoria looked like she wished she were anywhere else, including maybe a volcano. Before I could react, Dad brushed past me into my own house like he'd bought the place. We need to talk, he said. Amazing how fast a person can go from zero contact to maximum entitlement. Mom followed, eyes scanning my living room like she was inspecting a vacation rental and debating whether to leave a bad review. Victoria hovered near the entry, clutching her purse like a flotation device. You can't ignore us forever, Dad said. We're your family. Victoria needs help. And you're going to provide it. No, I said. I'm not. You're her brother, Mom insisted. Biologically, I said. That's where it ends. Victoria started crying. Or maybe leaking. Hard to tell. I want us to have a relationship, she said, voice cracking. I know everything that happened is my fault. If I hadn't gotten sick, it wasn't your fault, I said immediately. But that doesn't magically create a relationship. Dad stepped forward, puffing up like an angry goose. We sacrificed everything to save her. Everything. I noticed, I said. Thanks for the memo. He launched into another monologue about duty, obligation, loyalty, respect, family. Basically the same speech he'd given on the phone, but now with more volume and dramatic hand gestures. Then came the real reason they were here. We need you to help her get a job, Mom said desperately. Your company must be hiring. You're established. You have connections. You could put in a good word. I stared at them. They drove 4 hours to demand I use my professional reputation to rescue the adult sister they raised into helplessness. No, I said. Absolutely not. You're being petty, Dad barked. Vindictive. Immature. And you're trespassing. That's when I pulled out my phone. You have 2 minutes to leave before I call the police. Mom gasped like I'd slapped her with a Bible. You wouldn't dare, Dad growled. I started dialing. 1 minute 45 seconds. Mom grabbed his arm. Let's go. This isn't working. Dad tried a final parting shot. You'll regret this someday. Perfect, I said. Then we'll be even. I slammed the door so hard the picture frames rattled. And then I stood there shaking, not from fear, but from the adrenaline rush of finally enforcing a boundary they never thought I'd have the spine to enforce. I called Uncle Frank. They came to your house? He asked, horrified. Yep. What did they want? To fix Victoria's life for them. He snorted. Figures. We talked for an hour. By the end, my pulse had returned to earth. But my parents? Oh, they were just getting started. Because if an ambush didn't work, they had an entire arsenal of emotional warfare ready to deploy. The emails started 3 days after the house ambush and arrived with the predictable chaos of a small hurricane made of guilt, manipulation, and emotional glitter bombs. Mom sent the long ones, the kind of messages where every paragraph dripped with phrases like healing, forgiveness, and moving past childhood misunderstandings, as if my abandonment were a minor scheduling error instead of a decade-long emotional exile. Dad sent the short ones, sharp, blunt, and almost impressive in their density of disappointment. Things like, "You've changed. Uncle Frank has poisoned you. You're acting like a child. You owe your sister basic human decency." My personal favorite was the classic, "I didn't raise you to be like this." Technically true, since he didn't raise me at all. Then came Victoria's message. Longer than both of theirs combined. Apologetic. Emotional. Carefully crafted to hit every soft spot a normal sibling bond might have. She said she wanted to meet. She said she felt lost. She said she was drowning. She said I was the only one who could understand what it was like to feel abandoned. That line hit me like a bad joke. I was abandoned. She was not. She meant well. I didn't doubt that. But the idea that we had some shared trauma bond was, how do I say this kindly, fiction. I didn't respond to any of them. And that's when things took a delightful turn from emotional pestering to weaponized guilt with bonus trauma stats. Mom wrote again to tell me Victoria had attempted suicide the previous year. Not to check on me. Not to ask how I was. Not because she thought I deserved to know. But because she thought it would guilt me back into the family role I never signed up for. You're the only one she might listen to, Mom wrote. As if my lack of involvement in Victoria's life was responsible for the darkest moments of hers. Dad escalated into the "you're dead to us if you don't comply" category of emails, always ironic when sent to the child they essentially replaced with a medical emergency. Hannah and Uncle Frank both read the emails with me. Hannah, who had met my parents once, didn't mince words. "They're toxic," she said. "You need to protect yourself." Frank was gentler but firm. "You're not responsible for their choices," he said. "And you're not responsible for fixing what they broke." 2 weeks later, after rereading a dozen manipulative messages, I opened a blank email. And I wrote the line I'd been avoiding for years. "I'm done." The rest poured out in one controlled, clear stream. No anger, no insults, just boundaries sharper than anything my parents had ever used to cut me out of their lives. I told them, "Don't call. Don't email. Don't visit. We're done permanently." I told them Uncle Frank was my family. I told them I wished Victoria well. I told them I was choosing peace. Then I hit send before I could talk myself out of it. They called instantly. I blocked them instantly. Blocked their emails. Blocked their social media. Blocked any possible path they might use to wedge themselves back in. And in that moment, standing in my living room with the digital walls freshly built around me, I felt lighter, freer, whole for maybe the first time in my life. Of course, life wasn't done with me yet. There was still the final fallout to come. The part where everything settled. The part where my new life finally took shape. The part where I found the peace I didn't even know I deserved. The weeks after I went no contact were eerily quiet, like the air after a storm, when you're not sure if the silence means safety or the start of round 2. But nothing came. No knocks on the door. No emails from new accounts. No messages delivered through distant relatives pretending to just check in. Just silence. For the first time in my life, silence didn't feel threatening. It felt like oxygen. Work took off. I got promoted to senior designer, started leading my own projects, and discovered what it felt like to walk into a meeting without the emotional hangover of family chaos nominating itself as the main character of my brain. Hannah moved in. She claimed my kitchen needed her intervention, and since she was right, I let her. We built a life together in small, steady steps, shared dinners, late-night grocery runs, arguing over the correct pillow-to-bed ratio, that kind of thing. She didn't tiptoe around my past. She understood it. Understood me. Being loved without conditions felt like learning gravity existed for the first time. And Uncle Frank, well, he was exactly who he'd always been. My constant. My anchor. My real parent. He came over every Sunday without fail, bringing groceries he accidentally bought too much of, which was his code for, "I want to make sure you're eating real vegetables." We'd cook together, talk about work, maybe tinker in my garage for an hour afterward. He never once said, "I told you so." He never once said, "They'll come around." He never once suggested I reconsider. He just showed up. Like he always had. Then, about a month ago, a message slipped through the cracks. Not from my parents, they were blocked into oblivion. Not from a random number. From a cousin I barely talked to. A short note from Victoria, passed along secondhand. She said she understood why I cut contact. Said she was getting therapy. Said she hoped I was happy. Said she didn't expect anything. Said maybe, someday, she hoped we could talk. And for once, the message didn't come coded in guilt or obligation or the desperate cling of someone drowning. It felt like a goodbye. Or maybe a letting go. For both of us. I didn't respond. Not out of anger. Not out of spite. But because for the first time in my life, I wasn't reacting, I was choosing. Choosing peace. Choosing boundaries. Choosing the family that showed up, instead of the one that didn't. Some people think cutting contact means hatred. For me, it meant freedom. Freedom to grow. Freedom to heal. Freedom to stop being the afterthought in somebody else's story and start being the main character in my own. These days, my life is calm. Boring in the best way. Work, home, dinner with Hannah, Sunday with Uncle Frank. Quiet, stable, unremarkable routines I used to envy other people for. Family isn't DNA. It's who stands beside you when everyone else walks away. And in the end, the people who let me down taught me how to hold on to the ones who never did.